They didn't just refuse to bless my marriage, they destroyed it before it even began. I can still see the look on my grandmother's face that night, cold, expressionless, as if I was a stranger standing before her, not the granddaughter she once claimed to love more than her own life. The music had stopped, the guests had gone silent, and there I was, standing in the middle of my engagement ceremony, holding the ring that suddenly felt like a mistake.
No one moved. No one spoke.
My grandfather's words echoed through the hall. This marriage will bring shame to our name. I wanted to scream, to ask why, to make them see the man I loved, but something in their eyes told me this wasn't about love.
It was about power.
About secrets buried so deep, they'd rather break me than let them surface. That night, my heart didn't just break, it began to question everything I thought I knew about my family. And I swear, from that moment, I knew their silence was hiding something far worse than disapproval. People say the Monroe family is built on tradition, respect, and love. But behind the polished smiles in our family portraits, there's a quiet kind of hierarchy, one that no one talks about, but everyone feels. Growing up, I learned early that reputation mattered more than truth. My grandmother, Margaret, ruled the house like a queen. Every meal was a ceremony, every word had to be measured. My grandfather, Walter, spoke rarely, but when he did, everyone listened, including my parents. My mother, Diane, was gentle, too gentle maybe. She never argued, never questioned their ways. And my brother, Ryan, the golden child, was everything they wanted in a Monroe.
Confident, obedient, proud. Me?
I was the emotional one.
Too curious, too soft,
too different. I remember one Sunday dinner, the kind that looked perfect to outsiders. The table shimmered with silverware, laughter filled the air, and for a moment, it almost felt normal.
But it wasn't.
My grandmother kept glancing at Ryan, praising his promotion, his charm, his Monroe confidence. Then she looked at me and said softly, "Lila, maybe one day you'll make us proud too."
Her words sounded like love to everyone else.
But I heard the truth behind them. You're not enough yet.
Still, I kept trying.
I attended every family function, smiled through every subtle insult, and carried the family name like it meant something sacred. When I met Ethan, I thought I had finally found someone who saw me, not just the Monroe name. He didn't care about our wealth or our status. He cared about the way I laughed, the way I dreamed. When I introduced him to my family, my mother forced a smile, my brother smirked, and my grandmother simply said, "What does his family do?" That one question carried the weight of judgment. Ethan's modest background didn't fit their idea of respectable lineage. But I believed time would soften their hearts. I believed love could bridge pride. A few weeks later, my grandparents threw a family reunion, a grand, picture-perfect evening. Crystal chandeliers, laughter echoing across marble floors, everyone dressed like they belonged in a magazine. Ethan held my hand nervously as I introduced him again, hoping this time they'd see his worth. Instead, my grandfather's hand tightened around his cane as his eyes locked on Ethan's face. For a split second, his confident posture broke, replaced by something I'd never seen before. Shock.
Fear. Guilt.
He recovered quickly, clearing his throat, pretending nothing happened.
But I saw it.
My grandmother saw it too. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her drink. That night, the warmth in the room vanished, replaced by a cold silence that only I seemed to feel. Something had changed. Something my grandparents were desperately trying to hide. And for the first time, I began to wonder, maybe their disapproval of Ethan wasn't about class or status at all. Maybe it was about something far more personal, something they never wanted me to find out. After that reunion, something shifted in the air, the kind of tension you can't see, but you feel. The smiles became shorter. The conversations, colder. My grandmother stopped calling me sweetheart. My grandfather avoided eye contact altogether. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. But it got worse. They started excluding Ethan from family events, small excuses at first. "It's just a family thing, dear," or "he wouldn't be comfortable at formal gatherings." I'd smile politely, pretending not to notice the way Ryan smirked every time Ethan's name came up. Then came the whispers. Ryan told me one afternoon, "You should really think twice, Lila. Marrying someone like him could destroy your chances at inheriting anything from the estate."
I laughed bitterly. "Is that all you care about?"
"Money." He leaned closer, lowering his voice.
"It's not about money. It's about blood. You're the only one too blind to see it. Those words haunted me. Blood.
What did he mean? The distance between me and my grandparents grew wider.
They'd host dinners without inviting me.
When I'd visit, my grandmother would talk to me as if I were a guest, not family. I tried to confront my mother, but she always looked away. Mom, what did Ethan ever do to deserve their hatred? I asked one evening, my voice shaking. She hesitated. Too long.
They are just protective. You know how they are. Protective. That word tasted like a lie.
When Ethan proposed, I was terrified to tell them. But I did, because I wanted to believe love could heal what pride had broken.
For a moment, I thought it worked.
My grandmother smiled, my grandfather nodded, and I almost cried with relief. They even offered to host the engagement party at the Monroe estate. But peace in our family never lasts long. The day before the ceremony, I overheard them in the study.
My grandparents. My mother. Ryan. The door was half open. I shouldn't have listened, but something told me to.
He cannot marry her, my grandfather said, his voice trembling. If she finds out. She won't, my grandmother cut in sharply. We've buried it for 30 years, Walter. Don't you dare bring it up now.
My knees almost gave out.
Buried what? Then my mother's soft, broken whisper. Please, just let her have this moment. She's happy.
My grandmother slammed her palm against the table.
Happiness built on shame is no happiness at all. I backed away, heart pounding, my breath shallow. That was the moment I realized, this wasn't just disapproval.
It was fear.
At the engagement ceremony the next evening, I walked into the hall with trembling hands but a brave face. Guests cheered, cameras flashed, Ethan smiled at me as if the world made sense again. Until it didn't. Because right in the middle of the celebration, my grandparents stood up before everyone, faces pale, voices cold. This marriage cannot happen, my grandfather declared. It would bring disgrace to the Monroe name.
The crowd gasped.
My mother froze. Ethan turned to me, lost. I felt every eye on me, pitying, judging. My grandmother's next words burned into my soul. We do not bless this union.
My world cracked open. The room spun.
And as I stared at them through tears I refused to let fall, I knew one thing. Whatever secret they were hiding, it was powerful enough to destroy love, family, and the illusion of respect we'd lived under all our lives. That night, I stopped being their obedient granddaughter. That night, I became the woman who would find out why. After that night, my life split in two, before the humiliation, and after it. In the weeks that followed, my grandparents' disapproval became something uglier, something that burned quietly through every corner of our family. I stopped being Lila, the granddaughter. I became Lila, the disappointment. They didn't even hide it anymore. At Sunday dinners, my seat at the table, the one next to Grandma, was given to Ryan's fiancée, Abigail, the perfect woman from the perfect family. I was told to sit at the far end, near the cousins, as if my presence was a courtesy, not a belonging. I'd sit there, smiling politely, pretending the conversations about my poor choices didn't reach me.
But they always did. Every word. Every whisper.
One afternoon, Grandma announced a charity gala, her pride, her annual display of Monroe grace.
She asked Ryan to give the opening speech.
When I offered to help organize, she looked me dead in the eye and said, Lila, dear, perhaps you should focus on fixing your reputation first.
The words stung like glass.
The room went silent, except for Ryan's soft laugh.
That night, Ethan tried to comfort me.
They'll come around, he said, holding my hand. But I could hear the doubt in his voice. He was beginning to feel it too. The cold stares, the awkward pauses, the way everyone treated him like an outsider. Still, he stayed.
Because he loved me.
Because he believed we could fight it together.
But the Monroes don't fight fair.
A month later, we attended Ryan and Abigail's pre-wedding dinner, a grand event filled with reporters, photographers, and the city's elite. I almost didn't go, but my mother begged me, please, Lila, just show them you're still part of this family. So I went, wearing a simple blue gown, standing beside Ethan, hoping for peace. The moment we entered, silence fell.
Then, whispers.
Faces turned away.
My grandmother's smile was thin, forced.
During dinner, a journalist approached our table. Mr. Monroe, he said to my grandfather, will both your grandchildren be married this year? The question was innocent, but my grandmother's reply wasn't.
Only one, she said coolly.
The other is reconsidering her future.
Everyone laughed politely. Everyone except me. I felt my face burn. My hands shook.
Ethan tried to speak, but I stopped him, because I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. But inside, something in me did break. Later that night, I found my mother crying in the hallway. She tried to hide it, but her hands were trembling. They shouldn't have done that to you, she whispered. Then stop them, I said, my voice shaking. Tell me the truth, Mom. What are they so afraid of? She just looked at me, eyes red, lips trembling, and said the words that froze my blood. Because if you knew, you'd never forgive any of us.
That night, I couldn't sleep.
Every glance, every lie, every strange silence, they all started fitting together like pieces of a dark puzzle.
The next morning, Ethan showed me something he'd found.
A box of old letters hidden in the attic of his childhood home, letters signed by Margaret Monroe.
My heart stopped.
My grandmother's name.
His house.
In that moment, I realized the truth wasn't buried in rumors anymore. It was buried in blood.
And once I opened that box, nothing in our family would ever be the same again.
The letters changed everything. They were old, yellowed at the edges, the ink faded but still legible. Ethan and I sat on the floor of his small apartment, the box between us. My hands trembled as I opened the first one. Walter, you can't just erase me. You can't erase what we had. You can't erase our son.
I froze. My grandfather's name. My grandmother's handwriting. But it wasn't addressed to him. It was from her. From Margaret Monroe to a woman named Helen Carter. Ethan's face went pale.
Carter, that's my mother's name.
The words didn't register at first.
My mind refused to connect them, couldn't.
But the truth didn't wait for my denial.
Another letter, dated 1996. If you ever come back, Walter will destroy everything.
He already told people the baby died.
I had no choice but to leave.
My throat tightened.
Ethan, this can't be real.
But it was.
Ethan was the son my grandfather had buried in shame, the son my grandmother helped to raise. The secret child born before the Monroes built their empire of respect. Which meant,
Ethan wasn't just an outsider. He was family. My family. I felt sick. Betrayed.
Dirty, somehow, not because of what we shared, but because they had turned love into a curse. They had watched me fall for someone whose existence they had erased, and when the truth started to resurface, they chose humiliation over honesty. I remember standing outside the Monroe mansion the next morning, the letters in my hand, ready to demand answers. The gates didn't open for me. For the first time in my life, the guard looked at me with pity, not respect. Miss Lila, they said you're not allowed inside anymore.
Not allowed inside. My own home.
I walked away numb, the sound of my heels echoing on the pavement like the ticking of a clock I no longer controlled. Later that evening, I received an email, a legal notice.
The family trust had been revised. My name was gone. My inheritance, revoked.
Everything that once tied me to the Monroe name, erased.
Ryan had signed as witness.
I called him, shaking with rage. You knew, I said through tears. You knew and you helped them. His voice was smug, almost pitying.
Lila, you brought this on yourself. You embarrassed them.
You should have just walked away. Walked away from what?
My own life. No, he said coldly.
From the truth.
That night, something in me died. I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by silence.
My phone buzzed endlessly. Reporters, family friends, strangers, all wanting to confirm the rumors. The Monroe heiress disowned for a forbidden love.
They turned me into a scandal. Into a story. My mother came to see me once. She didn't knock, just stood at my door with tears in her eyes.
I wanted to tell you, she whispered. I begged them to stop.
Then why didn't you? I asked, voice shaking.
You watched them ruin me.
Her answer broke me more than her silence ever had.
Because they would have ruined me first. And that's when I understood the truth. In this family, love was conditional, but loyalty to power was absolute. Days turned into weeks.
I stopped answering calls, stopped showing my face in public.
Ethan left town, not out of guilt, but because he couldn't bear the storm.
And I
I just sat in the wreckage, staring at the pieces of a life I didn't recognize anymore. But grief has a strange way of evolving. When the tears ran dry, what replaced them wasn't peace, it was clarity. They had stolen my dignity, erased my name, and buried me beneath their lies. But they forgot one thing: I still had the truth. The same truth they had feared for decades. The same truth that could turn their polished name into ashes. So, I started collecting. Every document. Every letter. Every photo. I spoke to people who remembered Helen Carter, Ethan's mother, and pieced together the story they had buried. It wasn't revenge I wanted at first. It was justice. But the more I uncovered, the more I realized they didn't deserve mercy. Because they hadn't just betrayed me. They had betrayed love itself. I folded the last letter carefully, placed it back in the box, and whispered to myself, not as a victim, but as a warning. They took everything from me. Now, I'll take back the one thing they can't control, the truth. And with that, the girl who once begged for their approval was gone. All that remained was a woman ready to bring down the Monroe legacy, piece by piece, lie by lie. That night, my tears dried, and my revenge began. Grief had taught me one thing: rage without a plan is just noise. So I stopped screaming and started listening. I listened to the edges of every story, to the pauses in my mother's sentences, to the names people avoided. I stopped begging for answers and learned to find them. First, I rebuilt myself quietly. I went back to work, paid my bills, learned to sleep again. But nights were for the hunt. I met with Clara in secret. She slid me an old address book, a stack of faded invitations, the name of a woman who used to work at Walter's office. They paid people to forget, she said. But people remember if you ask the right questions. I began to collect proof like a surgeon gathers tools. Hospital records. Marriage licenses. A notarized copy of an old affidavit buried in county files. I sat in dusty clerk offices and read boxes of documents until my eyes blurred. Each paper was another thread leading back to the same knot. The Monroe family had rewritten history to protect a reputation built on a lie. Ethan came back for a week when the trail first tasted real. We sat at his kitchen table, the same table where we'd first read those letters, and he signed a consent for a DNA test. If it clears anything up, he said quietly, do it. I knew the test could wreck him, but he looked at me like he trusted me enough to carry the weight. That trust became fuel. I contacted a journalist I'd met once at a charity event, a woman who didn't do soft stories. She wanted documents, witnesses, and a narrative that would stand up to lawyers. I gave her everything: letters, affidavits, the DNA consent, and a list of witnesses who remembered Helen Carter. We planned the exposure like a quiet operation: timelines, backups, legal counsel. I wasn't reckless. I wanted the truth to be undeniable. But revenge isn't only about facts. It had to hurt in the places that mattered: their pride, their public facade. So I chose their stage. The Monroe Charity Gala was their yearly altar, where they polished the name and fed the press. It was where Margaret reigned and Walter's silence was priestly. If the truth had to be revealed, it would be where they felt most untouchable. Clara dug up one more thing: a ledger showing financial transfers from the family trust to an unknown beneficiary the year Helen disappeared. It wasn't proof of everything, but it was proof they had covered costs, hushed things, bought silence. I felt the pattern close like a trap. As I prepared, I practiced my voice. Not the trembling voice of a betrayed girl, but the steady one of someone who knows the facts and will not be derailed. I rehearsed the moment I'd hand the journalist the documents. I pictured the press lights, the hush, the look on my grandmother's face when the first line read across the screen. Evidence reveals long-buried family secret: the Monroes paid to erase a child. Ethan warned me about consequences. This will ruin a lot of people, he said. Is that what you want? Yes, I told him. I want the truth to ruin the lies. There were risks. Lawsuits. Betrayals I hadn't foreseen. My mother could lose everything. Ryan could turn vicious. But sitting alone in my small living room, the box of letters on my lap, I felt something I hadn't felt since the day they humiliated me: control. The plan was tight, legal, and personal. It would expose not just the secret, but the choices that kept it buried. It would force the Monroes to answer in public, where whispers mean nothing and the truth can't be swallowed. On the night of the gala, I buttoned my blue dress, the same color I'd worn to Ryan's pre-wedding dinner, and told myself one thing: I would not flinch. I picked up the sealed envelope containing the final piece of proof, stepped out the door, and the air felt unbearably still. Inside me, the old frightened girl watched from a distance. But the woman holding the envelope was not afraid anymore. She only wondered if she was ready to finish what she had started. The Monroe Charity Gala sparkled like a fairy tale, chandeliers glowing, champagne bubbling, the air thick with false grace. I walked in through the main entrance, not as a guest, but as a storm wearing a smile. Every head turned. Every whisper carried my name like a warning. That's her, the disowned one. I didn't flinch. The blue dress shimmered under the lights, the same one I'd worn the night they humiliated me. Tonight, I would return the favor. At the far end of the ballroom stood my grandparents, Walter and Margaret Monroe, elegant, untouchable, the picture of dignity. Beside them, Ryan played host, shaking hands, charming donors. The perfect family tableau. Except this time, I was no longer their missing piece. I was their reckoning. As the dinner ended, the orchestra softened. The master of ceremonies took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "please welcome Margaret Monroe to deliver her annual address." Applause filled the room. My grandmother stepped forward, graceful, poised, oblivious to the storm, standing just a few feet away. "Family," she began, "is the foundation of legacy. We stand today as proof that integrity—" I interrupted her. My voice cut through the hall like glass. "Integrity? Are you sure that's the right word, Grandma?" The room froze. Cameras turned. Ryan's smile faltered. My grandmother blinked, her lips tightening. "Lila," she said softly, "this isn't the time." "Oh, I think it's exactly the time." I walked toward the stage, my heels clicking against marble. "For years, you've preached family honor. You've silenced anyone who dared to question it. But tonight," I pulled out the envelope, "tonight, your silence ends." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My mother stood near the back, pale, trembling. I opened the envelope and read aloud, my voice steady. "If you ever come back, Walter will destroy everything. He already told people the baby died." I had no choice but to leave. The audience murmured. I continued. "This letter was written by Helen Carter, the woman my grandfather once loved, the woman you forced out of this family. And the child you erased, the one you said never existed, grew up to become the man you tried to destroy." I looked directly at my grandfather. His face was colorless. "His name is Ethan Carter." A wave of shock hit the room. My grandmother's hand trembled on the microphone. "Lila, stop this madness," she hissed. "You're humiliating yourself." "No, Grandma," I said quietly. "I'm freeing myself." The journalist I'd spoken to earlier stepped forward, cameras flashing. Screens lit up with photos, letters, financial ledgers, proof that the Monroes had paid off witnesses, altered records, and silenced Helen Carter decades ago. Ryan shouted, "This is a setup," but the crowd wasn't listening. The truth had its own gravity, pulling everyone toward it. My grandfather tried to speak but broke down instead. For the first time, I saw something raw in his eyes, regret. "I wanted to protect the family," he whispered. "You don't understand what this name meant." "It meant more than love," I replied. "And that's exactly why it deserves to fall." Margaret tried to steady her voice. "You'll ruin everything we built." "No," I said, turning to face the audience. "You ruined it when you chose shame over truth. When you decided reputation mattered more than people." The room erupted, guests whispering, flashes exploding. The Monroes' perfect empire cracked in real time. My mother wept silently in the corner, but I saw something behind her tears, relief. The weight she'd carried for years had finally shattered. Security tried to escort me out, but the crowd parted instead, letting me walk through. I stopped halfway, turned back once more, and said the words that had been burning in my chest for months. "You taught me that silence keeps families strong. But I've learned, silence only keeps the guilty safe." The orchestra remained still. The air was heavy with truth, with shame, with liberation. I laid the final letter on the table beside my grandmother's untouched champagne glass and whispered, loud enough for her to hear, "Now, the world knows who you really are." And with that, I walked out, through the same doors that once closed in my face, into a night that finally felt like freedom. Behind me, the applause didn't return. Only silence. The kind that follows when lies die, and truth finally takes their place.
The night air felt different when I stepped outside, sharp, clean, alive. Behind me, the Grand Monroe Ballroom stood frozen in chaos, but I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The truth had already done what I came for. It had burned through decades of lies, leaving only ashes where arrogance once stood. For the first time in years, I could breathe without fear. My hands still trembled, not from anger, but from release. Every cruel word, every look of rejection, every night I spent wondering if I was the problem, all of it had led to this quiet freedom. I walked down the marble steps, heels echoing softly. A car door opened. Ethan stood there, eyes glistening under the streetlight. "You did it," he whispered. "No," I said with a small smile. "The truth did." He nodded. And for a moment, we stood in silence, two people bound by scars, now free by courage. Back inside, I knew their empire was collapsing. Ryan's deals would be investigated, my grandparents' reputation questioned, their faces splashed across headlines that once adored them. But none of that brought me joy. Revenge had done its part, justice had followed. What remained was peace. I didn't want their money. I didn't need their name. What I wanted, what I'd always wanted, was respect. And in taking it for myself, I realized something: dignity isn't something others can give or take. It's something you reclaim when you stop begging for it. Weeks passed. The Monroes disappeared from social circles, their charity foundation suspended. My mother moved out of the family estate, finally unshackled from loyalty that had nearly destroyed her. We met one morning in a small cafe by the river. She looked older, softer, lighter somehow. "I never said it before," she murmured, tears gathering in her eyes, "but I'm proud of you." I reached across the table, holding her hand gently. "You don't have to say it," I said. "You showed it when you didn't stop me." We sat in silence for a while, watching the water flow, calm, unstoppable, indifferent to the stones beneath it. Life was like that now, moving forward, carrying everything but clinging to nothing. Later that day, I returned to my apartment, a small, sunlit space filled with plants and unfinished dreams. On my desk lay the last letter from Helen Carter, folded neatly beside a framed photo of my younger self. I opened it again, the words whispering across time. "When they deny you, remember, truth will always wait for its moment. You don't need their name to have worth." I smiled through the tears. Helen's voice, my mother's silence, my own pain, they had all shaped me into someone unbreakable. As the sun dipped below the skyline, I whispered to myself the line that summed up everything I'd learned, a truth carved from years of silence and survival. They tried to bury me in shame, but they forgot, roots grow strongest underground. The story was no longer theirs to control. It was mine to tell, mine to end, mine to rise from. I didn't seek revenge anymore, I sought peace. Because in the end, justice isn't about destroying others, it's about finding the strength to rebuild yourself. And as the light faded from the window, I finally understood. Losing their love was never the tragedy. Losing my self-worth had been. And reclaiming it, that was my victory.